So now we are live. So today, my guest is Chantal Contorines, a coercive control co-parenting coach. How's that for alliteration out there? And I'm really grateful to have her on the show because this is one of the issues that so many people struggle with. It's one of the most difficult situations. And I want Chantal to enlighten us all on some of her techniques and tips and tricks. How are you today, Chantal?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here, Jared.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I guess to begin with, we could start with how you wound up in this space here and like how you learned what you learned.
Okay, so I was an educator for 25 years, and I just moved into this form of education. So prior to this, I was a teacher who taught children who are dyslexic, and based on my own personal experience with divorce, it segued into this quite naturally. And then I took courses after courses after courses. I also have a psychology background, so it lends really well into what I do right now and trying to help people navigate this whole, because as you know, it is incredibly chaotic and very confusing, and there's not a whole lot of support for protective parents.
I bet. I mean, where do you start with people when they first reach out to you? How do you begin?
So first of all, we have a consult just because I want to know that, like, the nitty gritty, like how long they've been married, how they're, how long they've been separated, divorced, how many children they have, what the relationship is with their children, how old their children are, what the relationship their children has with their other parent. And then I really tease out, my work is really trying to build strong bonds between protective parents and their children, because a narcissistic abuser, AKA a coercive controller, their goal is to break a protective parent. Their goal is to break their ex by any means necessary. And they oftentimes weaponize their children to do so. And the easiest way to do that is to turn their children against their other parent. And I see it all the time, unfortunately.
And how do you see them do that? What are the common techniques and tactics they do?
So it depends on if they're covert. Coverts are far more insidious, right? They never have to say, hey, your dad or mom is like a jerk. They can simply, oh, I'm so sorry that dad doesn't know how to braid your hair like I do. Oh, I'm so sorry that mommy doesn't take care of your health the way that I do, right? And it implants these negative seeds of doubt into their children about the capacity for their other parent to care for them, right? It creates this really fear-based type situation for children who are like, well, I don't know if I can trust my other parent now, right? So that's the covert, and it's methodical, right? It's strategic, it's in every interaction, and it's literally all day, every day. But when I talk to adults who have dealt with this, they're like, it's literally all I dealt with. Every time I went to this parent's house, it's in every word, every conversation, they sneak these little jabs in, right? It's a death by 1,000 cuts. And then there's the more overt, right? And they have no problem saying, I can't believe you would side with your mom. She cheated on me and left the family, right? And she abandoned us, right? They're very overt about it. There's no qualms about being open and honest. Well, their version of honesty, which is not really honest. And so it's the insidious, continuous, methodical stripping. And it can happen in like 6 months. Children who were like really attached to their parents can suddenly not want to go back to see them. And they align with their abuser, right? Because these children are also being abused by the same person who abused their other parent. They align with their abuser, A, because they're confused, A, because it's a person that they actually trust. And it's also really to secure safety in a very unsafe environment. And they don't see any way else to get out. So that's why parents really need to be proactive in how they parent their children and not just, hope and pray. I just hope and pray that it all turns out. That's wonderful. And I want you to also have that, be hopeful and optimistic, but I also want you to partner that with educated strategies and tools to help protect your children and safeguard them from this.
Awesome. I love that. And let's go back to the covert example. When someone's doing some of those covert tactics, what are your suggestions for the other parent in that dynamic?
Okay, so children come back and they might actually mimic exactly what the other parent said. Well, daddy said that you don't take care of my health the way that he does, or you don't feed me good food like he does. So if you counter that, right, your natural inclination as a person who's being confronted with what you know is not the truth, it's a bold-faced lie disguised as the truth, right? Your natural inclination, anyone's, is to counter that. That's not true, right? But now your child has two adults that they trust saying two totally different things. Your child's even more confused. So what you really have to do is lay a foundation of critical thinking. Critical thinking is really your biggest asset in this entire fight and battle, to teach your children to think critically, irrespective of who is telling them what, right? Could be their parent telling them something, their teacher, their peer, their president, their prime minister, whoever it is telling them something, but they actually have to sit and think critically about what they're hearing and then see if it aligns with what they actually know to be true.
And that's a good one there too, because I know a lot of parents, when they're getting accused of things or told, yeah, you're not a good parent, you're not taking care of the kids the way I am, they get really tempted to like get sucked in and
Yes.
yell right back and jade, justify, argue, defend, or explain.
And you never jade, right? Like you never justify, argue, defend, and explain, right? That's like narcissism 101, because you just perpetuate the same cycle, right? Now you're engaged in this argument, you're engaged in this battle. And you have to remember, a narcissist thrives on this kind of stuff, right? And children are just, they're the innocent pawns. And they like honestly don't know which way is up. And you have to remember, it's active brainwashing happening in the other home, right? Just like any cult, if you repeat a message over and over again, if you isolate your people, if you confuse them, exhaust them, people are going to buy into the narrative, right? And so for a healthy, protective parent, your task is really hard if you fight it the same way that they're doing it, right? By saying that's actually not true. So you actually have to be methodical and smart and strategic in how you counter the active counter parenting. It's very convoluted.
Sure.
It's not simple, and every family dynamic is different, especially if there's siblings, because as you probably are aware, there's always a hierarchy, right? There's the golden child, there's the lost child, then there's a scapegoat child, and if there's more children, good luck. And those positions are always evolving, right? They're not concrete. So the golden child can be the scapegoat child and can be moved around to the lost child, depending on what they do for the family and what image they curate for the family.
Right. And I've said this to people about it before, but like there's a line where you want to have open lines of communication with your kids so that they feel comfortable asking you anything.
Yeah.
But where is the line maybe where you would say, no, this is going too far. Now you're kind of going into like playing their game, or like doing a smear campaign right back or something like that?
Well, that's where your integrity plays a huge part. That's where you are your child's best expert. You know your child better than I know your child, better than their teacher, better than their other parent. You know how mature your child is, how well they're able to absorb information. Just because your child is 16 doesn't mean they're necessarily as mature as another 16-year-old, right? They might be very innocent and very naive in their thinking. So you have to tailor how you speak to your children, right? And you have to foster open conversations in your home so that your children truly feel comfortable talking to you. But there's also, you want to keep your children. So if your children come to you with questions, right, you can answer those questions honestly, but in an age-appropriate manner. If your child comes home with accusations based on what they've heard in the other house, that's where you really have to toe the line between giving them real information, because you don't want to gaslight your children, right? I'm not a fan of, trying to gaslight our own children or manipulate them, but I also don't want them to be exposed to more adult content than they already have been. And it's really easy, tit for tat. Well, your dad said this, so I'm going to say this. Your mom said this, so I'm going to do that. But these poor children are now in a tug of war, and they're the rope, right? And they're being pulled back and forth. So at some point, you actually just have to be the better, bigger parent. And that's really hard. You've been abused, and now you've worked into post-separation abuse, which is equally, if not more horrifying than the abuse that you experienced before. But it's for your children, right? You always have to remember why you're doing this. It's not for you. It's not your ego. It's not getting back at your ex. It's what's in my children's best interest. And is this fight in my children's best interest? Is laying down the rope in my children's best interest? Is telling them the truth in my children's best interest? Sometimes it is, right? And again, that's where you become so vital to your children thriving through this.
I love that framing though, too, is it in my children's best interest? And I think having the maturity to know, okay, this is a hill that I should die on this hill here because it's that important. But then what are the other things to let go? And I know some people, they're going to have a problem with even just hearing be the bigger person thing. Because that's something that maybe others have told them before.
Oh yeah, but that phrase from the wrong person is a way to subvert people and to get them to shut up, right? But with the right people, it's not that you don't have a right to advocate for yourself, and you don't always have to be the bigger person when it comes to your ex. If it was just you and your ex, giddy up, right? Pull up your sleeves and get out your fists and brawl. But when it comes to your children, is that going to be in their best interest? You always
I
have
love
to go
that.
back to that, right? Always go back to, is it in your children's best? And sometimes it is. Absolutely. Sometimes you have to fight the fight. Sometimes you have to enter the battle. Sometimes you have to go to war. Sometimes you have to tell your children the truth because they've asked you hard questions. And your role as a parent is to not lie to your children, right? So if they're asking you pointed questions, sometimes you actually do have to tell them the truth, again, at an age appropriate level. And sometimes you just, have to avoid. And sometimes you just have to say, you know what? Even though this would feel so good right now, it's not going to serve my children.
Okay. So here's some common ones I hear.
Yeah.
For example, maybe a parent physically abused another parent, or maybe there's been SA.
Yeah.
What do you suggest to say to the kids in a circumstance like that?
Again, it depends on the children's age, right? So if the children have witnessed this, right? And oftentimes children aren't even in the room, but if you talk to any kind of victims who were children, they oftentimes knew what was happening behind closed doors, right? They can feel, children pick up on the energy of the house, the tension, right? And so if your kids have been privy to this, if they've seen it, experienced it, heard it through closed doors when you thought that they were sleeping, but they were actually awake, it's important that you have discussions with them about this, right? Because your children are looking to you to model. So if you sweep things under the rug, if you don't talk about this openly and honestly, then your children are going to say, okay, well, it's okay to hit people. It's okay to throw a cup at the wall at his head, right? It's not a big deal. My mommy did that to my daddy, or my daddy did that to my mommy. And we didn't really talk about it, right? So again, age appropriate. Your children don't have to know all the all the itty nitty ditty details, but they should know enough, again, if they're asking you and you want to, allow them to see you creating boundaries, right? Especially around your own safety post-separation. So if there was physical abuse, you might have some very strong boundaries around pickup and transitions, right? And if your kids are like, well, why are you doing this? Well, your mommy or daddy has a hard time controlling their anger. And this protects me and it protects you guys. Right. And that becomes very difficult. If you're in an active litigation, right? Anything that you say can and will be used against you. Right. So you have to know your case, which I don't know. Right. So don't say this if you're in the middle of a contentious divorce, because your kids can go back and say, well, mommy said that you hit her all the time. And so we have, then that's going to be, the tables are going to be turned against you, and Darvo is going to be enacted, and you're going to become the offender and they're going to become the victim. And you're smearing their name to their children, which is probably why their children don't feel comfortable coming to see them. When in actuality, it's because they don't feel safe with you.
Oh, I can see it's probably a lot of horror stories with the courts that you have to hear about too, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you always have to take whatever anybody tells you, unless you have a working relationship with this expert, with a grain of salt, right? So just because I'm telling you to have open conversations, you have to, A, talk to your lawyer, and B, trust your gut, right? You know your case. I don't know your case. I don't know you, right? I don't have a relationship with you. So that is why I work with people one-on-one in small groups, so that I can actually give them expert advice based on and tailored to their specific needs.
Right. And do you recommend some of the co-parenting apps out there, like Our Family Wizard, or fill in the blank with whatever other ones are out there?
So our Family Wizard, Talking Parents, those are both good ones. Anything that keeps them accountable, anything that takes them out of your mainstream, right? You don't want them calling you. You don't want them texting you, even email, right? Anytime your phone pings, the anxiety builds, especially if you're still, actively like in litigation, or you still haven't been able to heal because the court systems don't allow you to heal, right? When you have to co-parent with your abuser, healing is a very slow process, because you're forced into constant contact with the very person who abused you and is now continuing to abuse you post-separation, right? So for my clients, I always say, don't text, use the app. That way it's contained. It's contained in one space. So all of your texts that come in from your friends, family, coworkers aren't under the guise of possibly coming from your ex. Same with phone calls. I'm not a huge fan of phone calls, because A, they will run circles around you. You won't even know what happened. And there's no verifiable proof of what they've just said. And they'll deny everything, even in writing. They'll say, I never said that. Right? Yeah. I didn't type that. I don't know who that person is. I don't know why I got that naked picture of that person in my text. That's so weird, right? You and I both know this is what they do. You can give them concrete proof and they'll deny it till they're blue in the face.
Right. And I think another thing I've seen a lot of is, so they'll recruit one child of two, and one child will take their side and actively counterparent with the other parent, right? So they take their side.
Yep.
What do you recommend for people in that dynamic?
Well, that's really tricky, right? And that is, they really believe in the whole divide and conquer, right? If you have more than one child, which so many people do, there's that, like, the hierarchy, right? So the golden child is typically the child who aligns the most with this parent. And the parent uses to spy, relay intel back and forth, and who mimics, because they're so tightly invested with this parent, right? That they actually take on this, there's so much parentification happening here, so much enmeshment. And so they actually take on this persona. But you have to remember, this is still a child, right? This is still a child who's actually being abused. And that is why you're healing. Like I always tell my clients, before you do anything else, you have to take care of yourself. If you've left this type of relationship, you are running on fumes, right? You have nothing in your tank left. And so your first job, your first priority is to take care of yourself. And people are like, oh, self-care, blah, blah, blah. They roll their eyes, whatever, Chantal. And then they have a eureka moment and they're like, wow, when I actually put myself first, I can then actually take care of everybody else around me, including my children, right? So, and what that looks like is when your children come back mimicking your ex, which is so traumatic, especially if you're still in the healing process, which so many people are for so many years. You're reactive, right? When your child comes back and they look like your ex and they roll their eyes like your ex and they had the same speech patterns, it feels very traumatizing. It's like your ex has taken over your child, which they have, and you're being abused by proxy through your child. So if you're not healed and you're, still empty and you haven't taken care of yourself, you're going to be reactive, right? You're going to be impatient. You're going to lose control much faster than if you are filled, right? And if you're filled, then you can be responsive. You can actually meet your child where they need to actually be met, which is just to understand that they're actually hurting. They're doing this not because they don't love you, but because they're so incredibly confused because somebody that they love is actively abusing them and using them. And when you do that, you actually give them grace and say, this is just my child. It's still like my 4-year-old who used to cuddle on my lap and, run his hands through my hair and go, oh, mommy, you're so beautiful, right? That's still that child there. They're just really angry and really confused and hurting. They're really hurting.
And that's the part that doesn't get talked about as much either. Just the pain and the confusion that the children are going through in this scenario where there's been a breakup or a divorce. They're upset. They may still even want the parents to get back together in a lot of cases, I would bet too. And they're resentful at the person that maybe has put their foot down and said, no, like enough's enough. And they might blame that parent and say, you ended the marriage. And I'm sure the narcissistic co-parent adds on to that and adds fuel to the fire for sure.
Fire, right? Like they will say they are the reason why this family is no longer. They're the reason why we're no longer together, right? And they actually actively campaign, even if it's not the truth, right? Even if it's they cheated and they abandoned the family, they will never take ownership for that, right? They were forced to cheat. They didn't choose this. Their ex chose this, right? But they'll rewrite the narrative. So the narrative is, I am the victim and they are the villain. And then you have these children who are so very confused. And you have to remember what you experienced as an adult in this abusive relationship is the same things that your children as children are experiencing, but they're just children and this is their parent. And how confused were you? As an adult who probably knew that abuse existed, you may not have known about narcissism. You may not have understood the different types like malignant, covert, overt, all that sort of stuff. But you knew that you didn't feel good in this relationship and you were still confused and you still aligned with your abuser, right? So many people forget that we aligned with our abusers to, seek our own safety. And we did things that actually went against what we actually wanted, believed, thought, had as our values or morals, simply because it was a way for us to feel safe in this relationship until we were able to leave. And they're just children and it's their parent.
Right. I mean, and the kids, they're basically unknowing flying monkeys in the case too.
Yeah.
They don't know it, but that's what they're being used as when they're being weaponized as pawns like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people forget that you were also more than likely at some point in some capacity also a flying monkey for your ex, right? If, for instance, they left somebody, oh, she was crazy, he was crazy, he was horrible, and you're like, oh, I hate that person, and you talk badly about that person, right? Like inadvertently, without even knowing, because you were defending your man or defending your woman, you acted as a flying monkey, right? And people forget that, and there's no judgment, right? You do what you have to do, and you don't know until you know what you're dealing with, right? And so people just believe, you know, he loves me, his ex was crazy, she must be a horrible human being, I can't believe she, you know, left him, and now she's going after all of his assets and turning the children against him. You believe their narrative because you believe this person to be what they're saying, which is a good person.
Right.
So yeah, if you can do it as an adult, knowing this stuff, imagine what children feel. And it's, again, they're young, their brains are still forming, right? They don't have the ability to see it clearly, which is also why your job as a protective parent is so important, because it's your job to teach them how to think clearly, how to think critically, how to see through the chaos and confusion that they'll have to live with for the rest of their lives, right? So your job is to teach them boundaries. Your job is to teach them, you know, how to advocate for themselves, how to think critically, how to understand what love looks like, feels like, and sounds like, which is very different from what their other parent is teaching them.
Sure. And I think that's all a great way to look at it. And it'll really help them, I think, deal with it in a more peaceful and mature way as well, as opposed to being more likely to getting sucked in, etc. And what are your tips overall for self-care? What are your tips for them to stay sane throughout the process?
Yeah. So self-care can be depending on your time, right? We all have full schedules. And, you know, when you ask somebody, how's your day? Oh, it's busy. Well, that's not how your day was. I mean, we're all busy, right? We're all busy in some capacity. But again, you have to carve out time. So physical activity is really important. What works for me may not work for you. I love to lift heavy weights. I love to go on big walks with a weighted vest, you know, because I'm outside in nature. I'm seeing the ocean. I'm breathing fresh air. I get to think. When I'm lifting the heavy weights, all I'm focusing on is the next rep. And how my body hurts and how I can't wait to be done. I'm not thinking about anything else, right? So these are things that you can do. You can meditate. Journaling is so crucial. Journaling, I love my clients. I journal, my clients journal. I tell everyone to journal. It's free. It gets all of the stuff that's in here that's bad out. And then I always like to end with the good stuff, right? Like what you can control, what's good in your life, what you're thankful for, right? So you get rid of the gross and you insert into the good again. So those are two easy things: movement, connecting with people, right? Finding support. That's good self-care. Expert support's really important, and also community support. And if you can find both of those together, that's like eureka. Doing things for yourself. You probably lost your passions. You probably don't even know who you are anymore. So finding things that actually spark your interest again. It could be salsa dancing. It could be playing tennis. It could be going to comedy shows, whatever. Find things that actually get you outside of your head and make you feel good, right? Again, when you take care of yourself, you show up as a better parent across the board. Even if this takes time away from your children, it's really an investment, and it's a return on your investment is going to be huge.
Absolutely. And I wonder if there's any co-parenting with the narcissist support groups out there too, like the way there would be Al-Anon or like an AA or NA. I wonder if there might be, for all I know.
Well, I have a membership that is that. So that's what I actually do.
Oh, there you go.
So I have like my private stuff, which is expensive and it's time consuming. And then I have my master classes, which are like mid-range, and they're really jam-packed with information, but I wanted them to be financially accessible to everybody. So that really most people could say, I can actually afford that, and I can walk away feeling confident and more empowered. And then I have my membership, which is where protective parents from all over the world, we have men, women, step parents come together, and they have weekly coaching with me. And then we have an expert guest speaker every month. So I'm sure there's other things like that out there. This is the one that I know about.
And where can they get all those from you?
They can either go to my website or they can find me on Instagram, and all that stuff is there. And they can always email me. This is the thing, is this journey can be incredibly disempowering, very hopeless feeling, and really isolating. So my work is to connect people, to support people, and to validate and educate them.
I mean, connection is priceless in this whole thing too. Even like people in your position and my position, it's what we also get. It's one of the added benefits of when we create content and do what we do. We meet all sorts of other people that are on this same path. I know I have, I'm sure you have too.
Absolutely. And it also community is so important. And unless you've experienced this, you really don't understand this. And so you can have friends who mean well, but they simply don't understand what you're dealing with. Well, it takes two to tango. I'm sure there's another side to the story. It's not really that bad. And it might not, right? It might not seem superficially to be that bad, but it's the microaggressions on a daily basis that add up, so that this one instance that you're talking about is actually huge. But it's all of the minor cuts, right? Every day there's like a microaggression, there's 100, 1,000. And that's why you need people who understand without you having to explain, right? That like understand you and take you for exactly what you're saying and say, I hear you and I see you and I understand you. And you don't have to go further. You don't have to write me a resume about your abuse. I know that you've been abused and I see you.
Right. I think one thing I've seen happen is sometimes where a woman, or it could be a guy too, but they're nice and they're almost too nice. And then the other person takes it the wrong way and they'll take it too far. And then it blows up in their face because say, oh, they just wish him happy birthday or something like that. And the guy's like, oh, she wants to get back together or she wants to hook up or something. Yeah. And then they escalate and then it turns into a rejection. The person rejects them and then they start to get punished. Mm-hmm. But I guess, how do you recommend for people to walk that line?
You really just, again, it's about your own boundaries, right? And when you're coming out of this type of relationship, and it could be your partnership, it could be your parent, right? I have clients who are adult children of, this type of personality. And a huge part of your work is your boundaries, right? And learning to not give more than other people give back, right? It's not saying that you always have to equally give and get, but certain people take up far more than other people, right? So you really have to be okay with saying no, and no is a complete sentence, and not having to justify that. Thank you so much for the invitation. However, I can't do it because blah blah blah. Just I'm so sorry, I just can't do it. And how many people who have left this type of relationship have a really hard time saying no, right? We contort, we acquiesce, we pretzel ourselves to accommodate other people, but at our own peril. And it's okay to give, but you can't constantly be giving to the wrong people. And so your boundary work is really important. And learning to be able to communicate assertively. It doesn't mean that you're being aggressive. It's just mean, no thanks.
Right. I mean, and I have a friend who's in this circumstance too. And from what she tells me, it just never surprises me, like how childish they'll go and how ridiculous they'll go and how immature they'll go and how petty they'll go and how spiteful they'll go. Like there is no limit to it.
There is no bottom. Just when you think you've seen the worst, they will they'll be like, well, this is actually more fun. And literally there is nothing that is off the table with them. Truly, honestly, you have to understand that all abuse is about power and control. And it doesn't end just because the relationship ends. And if you have children together, children are the easiest vehicle to continue to abuse you post-separation. And they will use that to continue to control you and have power over you, right? You leaving, right? Even if they cheated on you and discarded you, you leaving, building a life, being happy, smacks of abandonment to them. And they will literally, their goal, when you understand this, it all makes sense, is to break you by any means necessary, right? So, and it's really easy to become broken, especially when they go after your children and turn your children against you, right? It's very easy when your entire life has been about your children and all of a sudden you're stripped of what makes you, you, because your children are no longer in your life. You can see how easy it is to become a broken individual.
Right. And I think they want control, but they'll settle for trying to make you miserable.
Oh yeah. And it's a daily basis, right? And it depends, if they don't have supply elsewhere, they'll come back to you, right? So part of your job is to recondition them to not seek engagement and supply through you, to go elsewhere for it, right? So that comes down to your boundaries again, and boundaries also focuses on your communication with them, right? It's really easy to go back and forth, right? But, and I get clients who get these massive emails every day, right? And you weed out what's important. And you say, okay, well, the actual question, after all the gaslighting, all the manipulation, deflection, projection, and Darvo that was in this giant email, really the question was, what time are you coming to pick up Tommy? And so you answer, I'll be there at 4:30. That's it, right? Yep. You've not given them anything. You've answered what you need to answer, which is about your child, and you've ignored the rest. That's your boundary, and it feels really uncomfortable. And they'll say, well, you're not being like a good co-parent, and, you're not, negotiating, and you're not, communicating with me. Well, you don't, just because they text you doesn't mean you have to respond, right? You get to choose when and how you respond. And just because they text you right now doesn't mean you have to answer right now, unless it's an emergency. I say you can give it 12 to 24 hours. It doesn't need an immediate response. And only things that actually have a question about your children actually need a response.
Right. I mean, that's a great way to handle that too, to pull out the important parts, pull out the actual question, ignore all of the crazy making, baiting, provoking, gaslighting, and just keep it clear, concise, and direct. Part of the gray rock philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And you aren't their friend, right? We call it co-parenting, but I always have brackets around it because you're not actually co-parenting. There's no middle ground. There's no in the best interest of the children when it comes to this type of personality. You are parallel parenting under the guise of co-parenting. They will always counter parent, right? So you would gladly co-parent, right? Most people who would leave these actual relationships would gladly co-parent. But they quickly find out that that's just impossible. It's like pulling teeth, pulling your hair, hitting your head against a brick wall. I'll say parallel parent, you say as little as humanly possible. You don't give them any insights into your life, right? If you have social media, you take out any mutual friends and you lock that shit down. It becomes private, right? You're not public. Any source of intel they can get about you is more intel they can use against you later, right? So if you're happy, they're going to try to break that. If you're angry, they're going to do more of that to elicit that same sort of response from you. So there's no emotion. It's just like a business transaction with a colleague that you can't stand, but you have to work with for the next 18 years. And that's how you view it, right?
Right. Now, I mean, because normally we would tell people to go no contact, of course, in this in the circumstance. But when you can't, how do you see that influence the healing of a trauma bond?
Well, so here's the thing that is why they have children, right? They have children specifically children are the best. They're grade A narcissistic supply right there because all children love their parents, right? And they'll work overtime to get any affection and attention from their parents. And B, it tethers the other parent to this abuser for at least 18 years and sometimes longer, right? So that's why they have children. And it makes your healing so much harder because the worldwide court system forces you into an unhealthy relationship for the children's best sake. And truthfully, if you're an abuser, you don't deserve to see your children or have any contact with them. I'm a firm believer of that because you cause so much damage to both the child as well as the adult. And so obviously healing is going to be slower because you're forced into contact with a person who abuses you and has created triggers in you, and they know which buttons to push to elicit certain responses from you, right? Which is why self-care and boundary and community are so important to you, right? If you have those three, it becomes so much easier, right? You can talk to people who get it, get feedback from them, get suggestions, and then work on that, right? And like anything, you've been conditioned over the duration of your relationship to jump. When they say jump, you say how high, right? When they text you, you feel obligated because if you didn't respond to their incoming communication, there was going to be a consequence, right? And so you feel uncomfortable about not answering and you don't know how to answer. So that's why you having the right support is critical for you healing slower than you would if you could go no contact, but still in a forward progression. And so it's slower, but it's still very possible. I have lots of clients, lots of people within my membership who are making huge progress despite the stuff that they have to endure. And some of the stuff is it's heartbreaking. And it really makes me cry. Like every week I have a good cry, because I absorb, right? It's hard to not hear these stories of these good people with their children and not feel sadness for them at the brutality of what they have to endure.
I mean, and how do you handle that part for yourself? Just not absorbing all of that and taking all of that energy with you.
That's why my self-care is huge, right? That's why I have boundaries. Like I don't answer DM questions. I simply can't. I used to get people who would, and I don't blame them. When you have experienced this kind of trauma and you find somebody who understands it, it's very easy to just blurb in their DMs everything that's happened to you, but I can't unsee and I can't unhear and unread so I just don't. I really have to. I only work with clients. And that's why I work out every day. That's why I go for walks. That's why I journal. It's not only for me and my children, but also so that I can actually show up for my clients and feel okay. I mean, as an empathetic person who just wants to hug everybody and say it's going to be okay, I absorb. But then at the end of the week, I have a big cry, and I'm not shy about saying that. I just need to re-regulate back to a parasympathetic state, and get out all this. There's so much pain, right? And this is all I do day in and day out. And I have lots of wins. My clients have lots of wins, but at the end of the day, it's still people who have no good choices. All good choices have been taken away from them. When you have an abuser in your life, all your good choices have been taken away. So you're stuck with less than good choices. And we do with that. But it's still, at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to have contact with this person, and your children shouldn't have to have contact with this person.
I mean, and I know you are doing amazing work, so you should definitely be proud of yourself for that. And I think some of the things that I see also happen is when there's a narcissistic parent and they can't go no contact, some people, even when that narcissistic parent has treated them terribly, they don't want to truly see it because they're still co-parenting with them. Oh, it's still the father of my children or the mother of my children. So there's this little bit of denial still hanging on there, and this trauma cognitive dissonance where they can sometimes see it, but then other times, oh, it's still the father or mother of my children, and they can't get to the bottom of it.
And so many people are hopeful, right? They don't want to believe, right? Most people, I truly believe, despite the work that I do, most people see the good in people, right? They want to see the good in people. And so they're optimistic, they're hopeful, they give them more chances. But you have to radically accept, and this is part of the work that I do with my clients, you have to radically accept that they're never going to change, right? That they are truly, and I am probably one of the most optimistic people you'll ever meet, which got me into trouble for a long time because I stayed, but it also, has allowed me to heal because I'm an optimist at heart. But these people are the most vile human beings. And I don't say that lightly, and I really don't want to believe that, but that's the actual truth. People who have no qualms using their children to hurt somebody are not good people, right? They're not in it. There is no love. And I openly, honestly say this, and it's kind of controversial, but if you abuse a person, you don't love them. And if you love a person, you don't abuse them. So love and abuse cannot coexist.
It reminds me of the old poop in your soup line. I forget who said it. You ever heard that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, it's abuse in a relationship is like poop in your soup. Even the smallest bit is unacceptable, and you wouldn't eat it.
Yeah.
Or do you eat or drink soup? What's the right way to say that?
Drink or eat. And there's also there's a psychologist that just posted this, and I'm sure you've seen it. Something about like even 10%. Even if 10% of your relationship was abusive, there is no justifiable amount for abuse, right? So even if 90% of your relationship was good and 10% was abusive, you can't quantify what is an okay amount of abuse. Abuse is abuse, right? Even like 1%, which is typically it's not. I typically say most relationships with an abuser are 80% abusive, 20% good, but even the good is still abuse, right? The good always has strings attached. The good is still manipulation on their part to get what they want. It's not genuine kindness for kindness sake. It's, I'm going to do this for you, and then I'm going to make you pay for it later on. I'm going to remind you of your obligation to me, right? I'm going to guilt you into doing what I want because I gave you that Tiffany bracelet that you wanted, or I brought you on a nice trip, or I gave you a coffee in bed in 2020, right? So now you owe me for life. There's no such thing as kindness for kindness sake when it comes to a narcissist. It's all manipulation. Everything about them is manipulation.
And that's important to remember too, because it's not like all bad, because there's also sometimes some good, it's the good that you just mentioned. And I think the fact that it's not all bad sometimes for people, it kind of lulls them to sleep, and they can get complacent really a little bit.
Right. Because they literally are predators, right? They've learned to, watch their victims, watch their prey. And so when they've pushed you too far, they'll give you something, just enough hope to hang yourself with, right? And if you're starving, stale breadcrumbs feel like a feast, right? But you're still starving. There was another thing that I heard my friend told me, if you've been walking through like coals, barefoot through coals, and you come to the other side. So the abusive relationship is walking barefoot through coals, and you get to the other side and there's shit right? And the shit feels really good on your feet because you've just been through this like horrible time. And you're like, oh, that feels so good. But it's still, you're still walking in, like on shit. So just because it's a little bit good doesn't mean it's not bad, right? That is an abusive relationship right there.
Right. And people try to hang on to that good too. Like, oh, but the shit is so soft.
Yes.
It's so soft and cool in
Yeah.
comparison to the coals.
Right. And they also remind you, right? This is what they do. It's fear, obligation, and guilt. And I call it the trifecta of fuckery, excuse my language, right? But fear, obligation, and guilt is what a narcissist, it doesn't matter if it's a parent, a partner, a coworker, colleague, it doesn't matter if it's your boss. This is how they manipulate people, right? You're fearful of doing what's going to go against them, right? You feel obligated to do what they want because they've just done something nice for you in 2020 and now it's 2025. But do you remember that time that I did that? Oh, yeah, I guess I should. And then you feel guilty, right? For not making them happy, for not doing what they want. So this is how they abuse. And they're not always bad, which is why it's so hard. And they're oftentimes really good in public, which creates that much more confusion for both children and adults who see that they can, be so generous and benevolent and charismatic and well-liked and love people and help people across the street and buy, I bought that little old lady groceries in the store. But then they're mean to you. So if you just try a little harder, maybe it's you, like maybe you're the problem. And if you just tried harder, maybe you could also get a little modicum of attention and affection like they dole out to everybody else.
I hear that a lot too. People are like, why can't they just treat me the way they do everyone else in public? And it just adds to the crazy making factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's also manipulation, right? That's manipulating their public image. They're all about the curated facade. They care more about what people think of them than how they actually treat their own people. That's vital to them, right? And it's vital to them for many reasons. It also helps their smear campaign. When they're going to smear you, people are going to believe it because, they've been an upstanding citizen. And also it makes the abuse victim feel like they're at fault. Look, they're so nice to everybody else. I must be the common denominator as to why they're so mean to me. It's me. It's not them. It's me. And it isolates them.
Right. Okay. What are some common mistakes that you see people make in this situation?
Like in co-parenting?
It's like common blunders or just things that kind of seem to not go well for them.
First off, I think the biggest thing is a lack of education. And I'm not saying that that's like their fault. You have to remember your abusers had a lifetime to hone in their craft, right? To become expert master manipulators, right? You are just probably an innocent bystander who just sees the good in people and loves unconditionally and is loyal and stuff. You have not had a lifetime of dealing with this. So the biggest thing I see is people just assuming things are going to work out, right? So many people, and I hear this is why I say this, they say, I hope and pray. I hope and pray that it's going to work out. And I love that. That's wonderful. But you need to couple that hope and pray with actual action. Because hope and prayers are wonderful, but they are not going to get you through this. And it's going to cause you so much pain and also your children. So education, people need to educate themselves like ASAP. They can't expect things to change, right? People oftentimes think, and they buy into the whole narrative. When the relationship ends, the abuse will end. So if I leave, things are going to get better, right? And if they believe that this is a good person, just because they abuse me doesn't mean they're going to abuse their children. I see this a lot too, right? Abuse they don't discriminate. They don't care about their children. If you understand that they don't love their children, you can see how they're going to abuse their children to get to you. So radically accepting that you can't control this, right? That this is how they are. It's never going to change. And to focus your energy on what you can control and not on them. Education is key to understand like what you're dealing with. That's very cathartic and therapeutic. But I want your attention to focus less on them and more on you. And I see that a lot. So much focus is on them. Now they're living rent-free in your head. You've left them. I don't want you to keep thinking about them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You might as well still be with them. I want you to start focusing on yourself, your healing, your home life, your boundaries, your communication, and on what you can control. And that's really where your power lies.
Right. I mean, and there are some people that I see, they'll blast their ex all over social media, post their picture and rant and rave about them every day. And on one hand, I'm like, well, if they've been invalidated a lot and they've been gaslit, like they're really trying to like get their perception of reality validated. Yes. But I could also see how that can go too far too in that direction. Absolutely.
So And here's the thing is when you've been silenced, and if you've been in a relationship with this type of person, your entire relationship was you learning to make yourself as small and silent as possible, right? And so it feels very therapeutic and cathartic to talk, right? And you can tell where a person is in their healing post-narcissist based on how much they talk about this, right? It's very common for people. It's like verbal diarrhea. How are you doing? Well, let me tell you, right? And it's all they can talk about. And you're like, okay, right? I've been there. I get how that feels. Learn to channel it into productive things, right? Social media, and you're right. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do this. You can do whatever you would like, but it gives them more fuel, right? You're literally journal, find a therapist, find a support group, find a membership. Find a friend, right? A friend that can just listen to you vent without giving you any kind of support, but just to be there to hear you, right? But also write it down, put pen to paper, because you can actually create a story. And you can also see how you were abused. And as time goes on, you can also, it's like you're peeling back an onion, right? So many people are like, oh, I forgot about that, right? Like I forgot that was what he used to do or she used to do in the relationship. But so honestly, writing is so cathartic for so many people. So write about it, but maybe not on social media, but maybe that's what you would like. And that's totally your prerogative. I'm not going to silence you. It's not what I would do. And it's not what I urge my clients to do. Because it can be turned against you with the wrong person, right?
Right. I mean, I would always recommend like talking to your friends and your close confidants about it, and the journaling. To me, that's a better way to go 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And the other part about it is it's not necessarily that it's like so wrong. It's more like when you're in a better place with it, you probably won't be doing that. Like you said, you're not going to talk about them as much. The power that you are like giving to them is going to be much less. It's going to be diminished, and you'll be just more focused on you and your side of the street and like helping your kids.
Yep. And like what you can do, like what you can control in your life, and you can't control that type of personality, right? So to put your energy there is futile. But there are some people who have used their social media to talk about their experiences, and their way with words is incredibly empowering. So it's not only validating for themselves, but it's also validating for those who are experiencing the same thing. But it's all in how you write, right? It's less, stream of thought. I hate this person. They're a piece of shit. It's more, this is my story. And so it's less emotional, less reactive, and more just like a conscious articulation of their experience. And I follow some people who have done this, and truly it's a beautiful thing to witness how they've empowered themselves using social media, especially when they're cut off from their children. And this is the only way for them to tell their story. But again, they've done it in a way that it's not vile. It's not lots of, he did this, she did that, horrible, 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 but this is what happened.
Right. I know what I've done in this situation is I try to keep the specifics out of it and just pull the lessons from it, like the lesson that could generally apply to many people, and pull that, because that's like really the benefit in sharing it online.
And see, that's also the difference. That's how you can tell where a person is in their healing journey, right? A person who's at the very beginning, who's very reactive, running on fumes, doesn't feel heard, seen, supported, validated. They're more going to be the stream of consciousness, right? Which is like whatever they're feeling, and it's just going to come out. Whereas a person who is healing, right? We're all never going to be fully healed. Healing is like a lifelong process, right? And we all have trauma. Even if you weren't part with this type of person, we all have childhood trauma that we should be unpacking. But you can tell a person when they're more responsive and less reactive, right? In both how they talk about this, and both how they write this down, and also how they engage with their ex. And it's
the energy, like even in how you speak, right? There's a calm, soothing energy to how you speak, and it shows, oh yeah, she's in a good place with it. This is the kind of person that I would want to get help from, because she knows what she's talking about, as opposed to like the people that are like all over the place and emotionally dysregulated, etc. That goes a far way. Yeah.
And that person's still intimately attached to the trauma, right? And there is no space. So you can tell a person who is still healing, they haven't healed completely, but they're able to detach themselves from the emotion and talk about it as these are the facts.
Right. Now, what are some of the success stories like, and maybe you can give people hope out there. What are some of the best case scenarios that you see?
Okay, so I've had clients who have come to me. I had one client who was so dysregulated by their ex's daily barrage of incoming texts, like so much projection and deflection, so many accusations and blame shifting. And this person, like literally 99% of their time was spent thinking about the next one that was going to come, how to respond. And by the end of our 8 weeks together, this person was like, 2% of my day is spent thinking about this. I'm able, to take control back of my life. My ex is no longer seeking supply from me. They've even said, I don't know what happened to you, which is narcissistic speak for I can't control you anymore. So like, what the heck is going on? I had another client who lost contact with their eldest child. This child aligned with their ex, who's a narcissist. And after our 8 weeks, and I did it like a couple. It was a couple, the step parent, as well as the biological parent together. And by the end of the 8 weeks, they had contact again with this child, and they were building the bridge. So here's the thing is I want you to have hope. Even in your darkest hours, there's hope, right? But you have to couple that hope with actual action. And that's the sweet spot, right? You always have to have hope in life, right? Even when it's like you're at the very bottom, when you've hit rock bottom, there's always hope. Tomorrow is a brand new day. And with the right support and the right education and the right action, you can actually change your entire life. And I see it all the time, despite the horrible stuff that I hear and see. I also see the positive outcomes. So yeah, like you have to have hope. Hope is what's going to sustain you, but you can't just have hope and prayer.
Right. I mean, and even for the religious people that would say, oh yeah, they would be into prayer, but it's like, well, God would help those who help themselves too. And that's where the footwork comes in. So it's very important to focus on for how much hope there is. There's also got to be just as much action as well. I think it's important to remember.
Yep. And I was raised Catholic, so my mom is all about prayer. And so giddy up, mama, you can pray for me all you would like. I love that. I'm also going to take action, right? And I can still say my prayers to God. I'm not super religious. I don't go to church, but I was raised Catholic again, so it's still kind of ingrained. And so I do go out to a higher power, right? Please support me. Please guide me. Please give me the ability to sit within myself and trust my instincts, right? That's something that people also have to do. Is when you've been gaslit for so long and invalidated, it's really easy to not trust your own intuition. Part of your work and your healing is to learn to trust yourself again, because honestly, you and your body knows what you should be doing before your mind even does. Even if it feels incredibly uncomfortable up here and goes against all of what you know, your gut never lies.
Right. And I think another big thing is, regardless of how terrible a situation is, there's a best way to handle every situation. Like you can do the best you can, regardless of how awful that situation is. There's always a best you can. Doesn't mean the situation in general is going to be great, but you can try to handle it in the best way you can.
And like I said earlier, truly, if you have been partnered with an abuser, just by being partnered and having children with them, they've taken away all of your good options, right? So your options that you're left with is doing the best that you can in a shitty situation. And that's what this is, right? And it's really easy to become helpless and feel hopeless, right? This is as good as it's going to get. And you can succumb to that. And again, there's no judgment, right? Because we're all on our own path. But I want you to actually realize that, yes, you have to radically accept that this is horrible, right? And this is vile, and it's unfair, and it's unjust, and it's repulsive. But what can I do? What action can I take? What can I control? And when you focus on that, I see this all the time in my work. People's lives completely shift from feeling helpless and hopeless to feeling empowered and confident, despite what their ex does or doesn't do.
Yeah, I love that attitude towards it and seeing it that way. And I guess the last thing here is too, and this is never talked about as far as I know, but there's got to be a non-0% chance that some of the kids are going to be narcissists themselves one day. Especially the ones that maybe take the narcissistic co-parent side. But do you have suggestions for people that are maybe worried about that scenario?
I think every protective parent that I've ever worked with, especially if they have more than one child, and there's one child that clearly aligns with the other child, with the other parent, that is always their concern, right? And especially when this child starts to mimic the narcissistic parent's abusive ways, manipulations, speech patterns, speech impediments, all that sort of stuff, right? Your job, again, is to remind your child there's just a child, right? And until they're older, it's not concrete. They might display these types of personalities that are maladaptive, but your job is to reinforce empathy, reinforce teamwork, equality in your house, right? There is no child that's better than the other. They're all equal. They're all just different. To really espouse love and really show your children what love looks like and what it feels like and what it sounds like. I can tell you that I love you, but do my actions show you that I love you, right? I love you are 3 easy, cheap words, but are you backing that with action, right? So that's what you have to do as a protective parent. And that's the work that I do, is to empower parents with the right strategies to be able to help their children navigate this and come out of this with so much more clarity and far less confusion.
Right. And even accountability and boundaries, that's love too. I think that's very important for them to know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. That is your love language, right? Boundaries are vital for everybody, not just for yourself, but for your children, and for your children respecting other people's boundaries. Because as you know, this type of personality invalidates boundaries, right? They're allowed to have boundaries as high as they would like, but you are not allowed to have a boundary. How dare you have a boundary, right? And your children most definitely will not feel comfortable, enforcing boundaries with this type of parent. But in your house, you create boundaries for your children, for yourself, and you help your children advocate for their boundaries in your house and with people that they feel safe with. And eventually they'll be able to enforce those boundaries with this parent when they feel safe doing so.
Right. Exactly. So I think that's pretty much it though, Chantal. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap this up here?
So here's the thing, is I could talk about this all day, every day. I'm super fun at parties. Just ask any friend. Like, I get my little soapbox and my microphone, my 5'4" frame, and I could talk about this all day long. So I could, but it's almost been an hour, so we should probably wrap it up. And we could always talk later.
All right. And where can they find you again?
So they can find me at chantalcontorinescoaching.com or on Instagram at chantal.contorines.coaching. Or they can email me, Chantal at chantalcontorines.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show here today, because I think you shared some awesome information.
Thank you so much for having me, Jared, and for reaching out. That was awesome. Honestly, I could talk about this all day. The more we talk about this, the more people are aware. And truly and ultimately, if you can avoid this personality type altogether, you're better off. And that's my job.
Absolutely. Well, it was my pleasure having you on, Chantal.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.